The hike. It was midsummer in 2016, along the dark, eerie trails of the Appalachian Trail. I recently retired from the Army, where I had seen some things during my career in the infantry, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that night. To continue my adventures of life, I decided I want to do a complete hike of the Appalachian Trail, starting in Georgia and ending in Maine. The entire trail is 2,190 miles long. This story takes place in Virginia, the fourth state on the trail when starting in Georgia, and also the longest portion of the trail. I had just crossed into Virginia. The sun had long set, and the forest was shrouded in an unsettling darkness. I normally didn't hike at night, but was trying to get to my next resupply stop as soon as possible, as I was running low on food. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the occasional rustle of leaves. The air was thick with humidity, making each breath feel like a chore. I was alone, or so I thought. For several nights, I had heard strange noises, low growls, whispers carried by the wind, and footsteps that seemed to follow me, but always stayed just out of sight. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination, the remnants of my military training playing tricks on me. But the sounds persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing night. On the third night in Virginia, the noises became impossible to ignore. I had set up camp near a small clearing, hoping the open space would provide some comfort. As I lay in my tent alone, the growls grew closer, more menacing. The whispers turned into guttural voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My heart pounded in my chest, and I clutched my flashlight, its weak beam offering little reassurance. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign of movement. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, the tent's fabric rippled as if something or someone had brushed against it. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the next move. A low, bone-chilling growl emanated from the darkness. Summoning all my courage, I unzipped the tent slightly and shone my flashlight into the night. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. Just as I was about to retreat, I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the edge of the clearing. The creature stepped into the light, and my blood ran cold. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. It stood on two legs, its body covered in matted fur. Its face was a grotesque blend of human and animal features, with elongated limbs and sharp, jagged teeth. The eyes were the most terrifying part, empty, soulless, and filled with an insatiable hunger. I scrambled out of the tent, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The creature let out a deafening roar, and I bolted into the forest, adrenaline fueling my every step. I ran blindly through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. The growls and footsteps followed, growing louder and more frantic. I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The cabin was dark and musty, with broken furniture and shattered windows. I found a corner and huddled there, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, listening for any sign of the creature. The growls and footsteps had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Just as I began to think I was safe, a loud crash echoed through the cabin. The creature had found me. It tore through the door, its eyes locked onto mine. Desperation took over, and I grabbed a broken chair leg, wielding it like a weapon. The creature lunged at me, and I swung with all my might, striking it across the face. It let out a pained howl, but it only seemed to enrage it further. With no other options, I darted past the creature and out into the night. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a stream. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a faint light over the forest. I looked back, expecting to see the creature in pursuit, but it was gone. I never saw the creature again, but the memory of that night haunts me to this day. The Appalachian Trail, once a place of solace and adventure, had become a nightmare. I finished my through hike of the Appalachian Trail, but the sense of unease never left. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Into the Canadian wild, 10 years ago, I was 22 and eager for adventure. I decided to go camping alone in the remote wilderness of Canada. I had always loved the solitude and the raw beauty of nature, so I packed my gear and set out, excited for what might lay ahead. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The air was crisp and fresh, the trees tall and majestic, and the sounds of the forest were both calming and invigorating. I set up my camp near a serene lake, the water so clear I could see fish swimming near the bottom. It felt like paradise. I spent my days hiking through the dense forest, discovering hidden waterfalls, and marveling at the untouched beauty around me. At night, I would sit by the campfire, listening to the symphony of nocturnal creatures and gazing up at the star-filled sky. On the fourth night, however, things took a dark turn. I had just finished cooking dinner over the fire and was settling into my tent when I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, perhaps a raccoon or a squirrel, but the rustling grew louder and more insistent. My heart began to race as I realized it was something much larger. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously unzipped the tent, shining the beam into the darkness. My blood ran cold when I saw the massive silhouette of a bear, its eyes glinting menacingly in the light. It was a grizzly, and it was far too close for comfort. Before I could react, the bear charged. I scrambled out of the tent, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. I knew I had to get to safety, but there was nowhere to go. The bear was between me and the lake, and the dense forest offered little in the way of protection. In a desperate bid to save myself, I grabbed a burning log from the fire and waved it at the bear, hoping to scare it off. The bear hesitated for a moment, but then it swiped at me with its massive paw, knocking the log from my hand and sending me sprawling. Pain shot through my body as I hit the ground, the world spinning around me. The bear loomed over me, and I could feel its hot breath on my face. In that moment, I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. I remembered reading that playing dead could sometimes deter a bear attack. With no other options, I lay still, trying to control my breathing despite the terror coursing through me. The bear sniffed me, its powerful snout inches from my skin. I could feel its claws grazing my arm, and I fought the urge to flinch. Minutes felt like hours as the bear continued to inspect me. Finally, it seemed to lose interest. It backed away slowly, then turned and lumbered off into the darkness. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, until I was sure it was gone. Shaking, I got to my feet and assessed my injuries. My arm was bleeding from where the bear's claws had grazed me, but it wasn't life-threatening. I knew I needed to get back to civilization as soon as possible. I packed up my camp in record time, my hands trembling as I worked. With the first light of dawn, I began the long trek back to the nearest ranger station. Every sound in the forest made me jump, but I pressed on, driven by the need to reach safety. Hours later, exhausted and battered, I stumbled into the ranger station. The rangers quickly tended to my wounds and listened in awe as I recounted my harrowing encounter. They told me I was incredibly lucky to have survived. That experience changed me. It taught me the true power and unpredictability of nature and the importance of respecting it. Now, whenever I venture into the wilderness, I am always prepared and cautious, remembering the night I faced a grizzly bear and lived to tell the tale. Nightmare in Eustis. One day, my friends Daryl, Carter, Monica, and I decided we wanted to go camping for the weekend. We loaded up Daryl's truck with all of our camping gear and set out for the mountains. After driving about 3 hours north of our town in southern Maine, we arrived in Eustis, Maine. We stopped at a gas station, which was the last stop before the campsite. There, we picked up hats and t-shirts that said, "Getting Useless in Eustis," along with all the beer we thought we would need. We finally arrived at our campsite around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The campsite was off an old logging road about 5 minutes from the Canadian border, where there was no cell phone reception. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. We set up our tents, built a fire, and settled in for a night of storytelling and laughter. As the sun set, the forest grew eerily quiet. We joked about cryptids and ghost stories, not knowing that our jokes would soon turn into a terrifying reality. Around midnight, we heard strange noises coming from the woods. It sounded like a mix of growling and familiar whispering voices echoed through the trees. We brushed it off as wildlife, but the sounds grew closer and more unsettling. Suddenly, Monica screamed. We turned to see a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the firelight. It had glowing red eyes that pierced the darkness and moved with an unnatural, eerie grace. Its body was covered in matted, decayed fur, clinging to its gaunt, skeletal frame. The creature's claws were as long and sharp as daggers, glinting menacingly in the flickering firelight. Its breath was visible in the cold night air, each exhale carrying the stench of decay and death, chilling us to the bone. Panic set in. Daryl grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the figure, but it disappeared into the darkness. We decided to pack up and leave immediately. As we hurriedly gathered our things, the weather took a sudden turn. Dark clouds rolled in, and it started to rain heavily, making it even harder to see and move. We piled into Daryl's truck and started the engine, but the tires spun uselessly in the mud. We were stuck. The creature's growls lit up the night once again, and with each passing second, they grew louder and louder. We could see its glowing eyes watching us from the edge of the forest. We tried calling for help, but there was no cell phone reception. In a desperate attempt to free the truck, Daryl and Carter got out to push while Monica and I stayed inside. Suddenly, the creature lunged at Daryl, dragging him into the darkness. His screams echoed through the forest, sending chills down our spines. We heard the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart and bones snapping. Blood splattered across the truck's windshield, and Daryl's lifeless body was thrown back towards us, his face a mask of terror and agony. Carter tried to help, but he too was taken by the creature. It ripped into him with ferocious speed, its claws slicing through his flesh like butter. Carter's screams were cut short as the creature tore out his throat, leaving him to bleed out in the mud. The sight of our friends' mutilated bodies was more than we could bear. Monica and I were paralyzed with fear. We locked the doors and huddled together, praying for the nightmare to end. The rain poured down, and the truck sank deeper into the mud with every hard hit taken from the creature. It circled the vehicle, its red eyes piercing through the rain-soaked windows. We could hear its growls and the sound of it gnawing on our friend's remains. As dawn approached, the creature finally retreated into the forest. Monica and I were left alone, shaken and traumatized. Daryl and Carter's lifeless and unrecognizable bodies lay there in the now dried-up mud. We managed to free the truck and drive back to town, not sure what to tell anyone. We went to the local sheriff's office. When we walked in, all the sheriff said was, "You saw it,